Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to episode 2 of the podcast I do here called Your Favorite X-Men, where we take a look at somebody's favorite X-Men character and discuss them, why that character resonates, and why that person is drawn to this character. Today we are talking with Drew Clark, so thank you very much for joining me, Drew.
Hey, really appreciate the opportunity. My favorite X-Men character is Longshot, and here we are. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of that guy.
Absolutely, and before we dive into Longshot, I'd like to build a framework for how you actually got interested in comic books in the first place, and how you found your way into reading X-Men comic books specifically.
I was part of this sort of trend in the early '90s of watching the Fox cartoon, and the X-Men cartoon was my definite first exposure to the X-Men, and then I picked up the comics. And one of the things that I wasn't afraid to do was to go deeper into the history. I wasn't just trying to be exposed to the mid 90s characters, but I wanted to see where this all came from. And that introduced me to Chris Claremont, and that exposed me to his run. And to the extent that my meager funds could allow me, I went out and I sought out those books, and it was joy. And one of the characters I really kind of latched on to immediately was this kind of aloof, this kind of goofy character named Longshot. No first name, no last name, just Longshot. How about you?
It's actually part of the reason I have this podcast is so I can talk to people and learn more about the X-Men. Because I'm fairly new to them, and I've been reading comics since I was like 13, but I somehow avoided the X-Men for years until last year when I took a chance and I got the Grant Morrison New X-Men Omnibus because, due to the pandemic, newer omnibuses weren't being printed, so I was like, hey, this is a good time to try something new, and, I just so happened to become obsessed with the X-Men and have massively consumed a ton of X-Men content in this following like year and a half. Let me ask you this though. I know that Fox cartoon was kind of a gateway for a lot of X-Men fans. I never watched it when I was younger. I instead watched that '90s Spider-Man with like the awesome guitar riff in the intro. But did Longshot ever appear in that X-Men cartoon? I only recently like watched the two first episodes of that show, but nothing more. So I'm a blank slate when it comes to that.
Well, that's the thing about that series. That series was meant to be a gateway. That series introduced you to five or six X-Men, and then you would go pick up a comic book and you would realize, well, in this variation of this comic book, there's five or six different X-Men. And then you would go grab some other one and it would be from 5 years ago, and it would be five or six completely different X-Men. Well, Wolverine was the consistent, but let's be clear. Yeah, so no, the answer is no. The comic book version at the time that I was jumping into X-Men had no long shot. The cartoon version that I was jumping into as a child at the age of 7, 8, what have you. No long shot. Long shot was from the 80s, was from a time I think we'll probably get into. Was Longshot was literally introduced to the X-Men like the year that I was born. So clearly I wasn't going out and buying a book that year. But that was something that I eventually went back to, and I was always someone that wanted to go back to the earlier Claremont years and where the X-Men came from. And I eventually discovered the Outback era and this incredibly hilarious and classic concept of the X-Men that was totally different than what we were getting in the cartoons or the comics in the 90s. And I really fell in love with it.
So with Longshot specifically, why do you think you were sort of drawn to this character? Like, what about him really resonated with you personally?
Oh boy. Once I discovered him, probably at the age of 10 or 11, I was going to comic book stores and grabbing these old books. He was cool. And that was one thing, is that he just seemed like a cool guy. He seemed like he could be the front man for an 80s rock band. And for whatever reason, that was still in my mind, as that could be a cool thing. He was very aloof, And that was very interesting, is that he wasn't, complicated like a lot of these characters that were so in their feelings, that were so they had the Claremont was very good at developing these complicated emotions, and then he introduced this guy that really didn't have any emotions. He was just a good dude. So these things were attractive to me. I don't know if you noticed, but he's just sort of in this long line of sort of clean slate characters that are attractive to an audience, right? This character that doesn't have a lot of backstory that an audience can latch onto, and they can be your surrogate as they react to the stuff that's going on in the X-Men the same way that you would, right? Longshot sort of always sort of was like, "Whoa, this is crazy." And yeah, it was as a kid reading it. You'd be like, "Yeah, I agree with Longshot. This is kind of wild."
It's funny, I always say that, like we're all reading these X-Men comics, but we each have our favorite characters, and it's kind of cool that we each are going to sort of get a slightly different view on a storyline or comic because we're going to sort of be, like a plus one to the perspective of our favorites. And truly, with Longshot, it is kind of a like, at least the stories that I've seen him pop up in, truly, it's kind of a, oh my god, what is happening? Because he doesn't bring with him the X-Men's normal adversaries like extremists or radicals or anything like that. So my previous history with Longshot, before the recommended reading you gave me, which we'll talk about here in a bit, was just like the Jim Lee Outback era stuff, and he was kind of the character I thought least about, and, I don't know, he kind of just fell in the background amid all the other chaos for me, but thinking more deeply about the character, he does have kind of this rock star, bad boy archetype to him, but then he also subverts from that because he's also this super idealistic, non-cynical dude who's just got like this really good soul. And it's fun in that Longshot limited series because, he doesn't know where he came from or anything about himself, but he's still got this kind of innate compassion and desire to do good, and, he helps the other people whose paths he crosses along the way. And I think just that aspect of the character makes him immediately compelling.
What do you think about him as a character that's introduced just whole cloth as a guy who has a past but doesn't remember it? There's a trope of that, right?
Well, honestly, when I was reading that and sort of diving into his origin story in this comic book, it does kind of just seem like your typical forgot my past origin story type thing, and almost parallels Wolverine's origin story in a way. But what's different and what's fun with Longshot is that they sort of play within that stereotype in a unique enough way that makes it fun and cool, because as it unravels, it's like kind of wild, right? I mean, he's not from our universe. He's from a completely different universe, and I don't think there's too many origin stories like that.
They do. They have an entirely like brand new universe to play with, and it's not trying to squeeze Weapon X into every sort of minutia of every government action that ever happened, like they do with Wolverine, right? So you're right. Yeah, yeah, it is similar. I just sort of think like there is this trope of this incredibly, and it's like a movie trope more than it is a comic trope, quite honestly. But it's like this guy that has this complicated backstory that he doesn't remember, and it replays with, you know, all these future travelers in the 90s and all that sort of thing. But Longshot was part of that, and I just think he sort of played it off goofy, where Wolverine played it off very serious. He was always very mad that he didn't remember it, but Longshot was always just like, "Well, I don't remember it. Oh well."
For sure, and it's funny you say it's like a movie trope because it's Longshot, right? For those who don't know, like in the comic, his character was created in the Mojoverse to literally be this perfect movie star slave for entertainment. And that origin is probably in part easy to do, but also satirical, like the rest of the book is when it comes to, like media and the television era.
I'm so glad that we got to revisit that, because it's a fun miniseries, and it sort of stands on its own as a mid '80s commentary on comics and movies and everything.
It was great reading it, and this is something that happens to me whenever I read X-Men books, but they just like don't feel dated to me, like in the way like an old Fantastic Four book would. thematically, they always feel applicable to the present. And I kind of felt at home here in this miniseries because in college I was a communication studies major, and in this miniseries, it kind of felt like I was going back to college because, we looked at media and journalism very often, and this book sort of subtly and not so subtly hit on the intricacies of all that. I mean, really, it's kind of like a discussion of all that.
I think that's very interesting that you come from a communications background. And is this, I mean, before this podcast, had you ever really had any exposure to Mojo at all?
He has popped up in a few stories, just in like some Claremont and like Jim Lee omnibuses that I've seen, him and Spiral, but I never knew too much about them, honestly.
Oh man, they have such a great, like, independent, like an unspoiled sort of mythology about the Mojo world. I really don't think that anyone that has touched on Mojo world since Claremont has ruined it in any way.
Let me tell you, when I first saw Mojo and Spiral pop up, I had no idea what to think. With Spiral, I was just like, okay, hey, you got 6 arms, cool, whatever, sounds good. You're gonna hunt people down, I'm game. And then when this huge monstrous creature that is Mojo just popped in and was like, I'm just here for the ratings, baby. It's like, okay, that's out there, but let's roll with it. But I feel like now that I've got some foundation for the Mojoverse and those characters, because I mean, Longshot, the limited series, that's Mojo's first appearance? It must be, right?
Yes, correct. Ann Nocenti and Art Adams. So Ann Nocenti wrote the Long Shot limited series, and Art Adams drew it amazingly. Art Adams has done amazing things on a million different books, but on this, he really did lay the framework. That 6-issue limited series introduced Long Shot, Mojo, Ricochet Rita, Major Domo, Spiral. I would say those are the 5 majors that were really introduced in that limited series, and then became huge parts of the X-Men universe. Huge parts of the X-Men universe.
Oh, and I'm glad you brought up Rita too, because
Oh, I love Rita, man.
yes, and I thought that character was fantastic, and it seemed like there's a lot more to flesh out there that would be super fun, and I have not seen her pop up in anything since, but
Oh no, she can't. No, she can't. She is Spiral.
oh, is it like a weird timeline thing that goes on there or something?
Yeah, it's a timeline thing, man. She is Spiral. I'm sorry that I had to break that to you. That's a bit of big news. But yeah, she is Spiral, and it's sort of the long shot Shatterstar dichotomy.
Oh man, okay. Before we go off the complete deep end here, let's just for people define what Longshot's powers are. Basically, what I got is that he sort of has this psionic energy tracing power, and then his main power is sort of probability manipulation, where he can, if it's a good-hearted cause and it's like truly ethical and noble, that he can manipulate his luck to, be more lucky. Is that pretty much the extent of it?
See, this was one of the questions that I had for you. My question was, how do you feel about non-mutants being part of the X-Men?
Yeah, because when I was reading this, I was like, oh, it seems to me that he's not.
He's not a mutant.
Yeah, when I was reading the Outback era, it seems like his team didn't even know that really he was not a mutant. Like everyone was just like, la di da da, we're all mutants here, hip hip hooray, and nobody ever questioned him because I guess they just assumed he was a mutant like them.
Well, it goes with part of the X-Men being a surrogate for any sort of outcast of any sort. You know what I mean? The X-Men just sort of invite and include any sort of person that is not generally accepted by the population. And so for whatever reason, the incredibly handsome, incredibly charming, incredibly lucky, blonde, John Bon Jovi looking uh, long shot does not fall into the category of a person that is generally accepted by humanity.
I actually really enjoy, though, when the X-Men have non-mutant characters on the team because those people sort of just act like as allies to the mutant cause and help out in any way they can. And I think it's this good companion piece to the metaphor of the X-Men. And it's like, hey, you don't need to be oppressed to stand against oppression with us. It's great. But on a different note, I do want to bring up that something I noticed immediately, and I mean, you mentioned this: the artwork in this miniseries is really fantastic. Art Adams does a really really great job with this.
Oh, it's phenomenal. And then the great thing is that he gets to redo it in Uncanny X-Men Annual number 10.
Yes, and that is another one of your recommendations that we can talk about, and we can just jump around here. But let me say that one I really really enjoyed because obviously one it had like all everyone in it, right? It had all the key players.
Oh, and the New Mutants and the Asgardians. It was great.
I love the New Mutants. They're one of my favorite X-Men spin-off titles, them and Excalibur. But they're so fun, and this was kind of their well, a lot of them had their coming of age moments already, but this was sort of their coming of age moment as a team together, kind of
Because why? Because why?
because the X-Men get turned into X babies.
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Which is
And
so fun. That's why I'm starting to enjoy these like Mojo stories and whatnot because they're wild.
the X babies are so cool. I have a list of things to talk about. The X babies are on it. But this is so great because it's the X babies that are actually the X-Men turned into babies. But there are later X babies that are clones or Mojo things or what have you, you know.
Yeah, it's so funny that at first I was like, oh, okay, they're just they've been turned into like babyfied versions of themselves, and that's just like a device to sort of like get rid of some of their powers. I know some of them didn't get their powers at puberty. Some like Nightcrawler had his just at birth. But then it's also like their mental capacity was sort of regressing as well, and they were getting into these kid like fights and whatnot. It was just a lot of fun.
Oh, the whole thing with I don't know. No one will be able to tell us whether or not the X babies or the Muppet babies happened first. I'm not sure, but both of them were like big parts of my childhood. What was interesting was Longshot trying to act as sort of like a father figure.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. And, and so let me ask you. So maybe I missed it, but it seemed like he didn't actually get like a formal invitation to the team. At that point, does that just happen in some of the following issues or something?
Yeah, it was a pretty informal thing, and I think maybe somebody would be able to say it was like editorial or something like that. But yeah, it was like because he made sure none of them died in Asgard or whatever, you know. Like it, yeah, that's how he wound up on the team. It was a little bit weird, but that was the start of his relationship with Dazzler, which I mean, uh, if there's anything you remember about Longshot, it's Longshot and Dazzler. That's just my opinion.
I agree, and like I said, I don't remember Longshot being that important in the Outback era, but what I do distinctly remember is all his flirting with Dazzler, and a half joke I always tell. Really, it's not a joke at all, it's just the truth. But I say, some people read the X-Men for the action and all that. I truly just read it for the flirting, the gossip, and, the soap opera nature to it. It's the character dynamics that get me, and, anything else like the action is just icing on the cake.
Well, that's what Chris Claremont did for us. That's the answer to your statement. Is Chris Claremont gave us all of these really, and it wasn't just. I mean, let's be clear. It wasn't just like all of the different accent lettering that he put into it where Rogue and Gambit were speaking different languages and all this. It wasn't all that, but I mean, Longshot and Dazzler definitely spoke to each other in a certain way, and Cyclops and Madeline spoke to each other in a different way, and that was in the same time period, and that was the same thing. So that is sort of the benefit of going back through Chris Claremont's era and seeing how he portrayed these characters.
And another interesting point here that we can I can tie back into Longshot is like a lot of these X-Men characters that we know and that are introduced, like yeah, they're very culturally diverse. They all come from different places, different backgrounds. And then Longshot is just like completely from a different place than the X-Men, and that's why his introduction and dynamic with the team I think is a little interesting too.
Yeah, yeah, he completely comes to it from this tabula rasa sort of perspective, which is the sort of thing that we get from Wolverine in the 70s, sort of things we get from Joseph in the 90s, or Bishop even at times. So it's one of these things. It's a trope. It's one of these things. It makes him very interesting that he would proceed forward and pursue, some sort of inclusion with the X-Men while having no knowledge of this or that.
Yeah, it's I found it like there was kind of this fascinating contrast too between him and the others because they all sort of I don't know if Longshot got this. You might be able to tell me if he did, but they all got this sort of, I guess, privilege of being able to learn and live in the X Mansion for a while, which is like kind of exuberant, really, when you think about it. Even though it may be attacked fairly often, but when he joins them, I'm assuming it's like when they're incognito on the run type situation, right?
As far as I can remember, Longshot did not have any experience in the X Mansion whatsoever, and that is somewhat of a unique thing for him. He was a member of the X Men from 1986 through 1989, um, but most of that era was after the mansion was destroyed, after the X Men were presumed dead. Uh, Moved to Australia doing what they were doing, despite the sort of bi-weekly nature of the book, because it was so, you think about this, like this was the era of the book that they were totally removed from what they were traditionally connected to. And yet it was being published twice a month, and they were in Australia. It was really, really weird that the book was so popular as it was, despite the fact that it was so non-traditional.
And if I recall correctly, maybe I'm not, at the end of at the end of sort of, I guess, Longshot's time in the Outback era, is it that he goes back off into the Mojoverse to, sort of try to free the people from slavery? Is that what happened? He just kind of disappears, it seemed, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was him and Dazzler, and this was a time that lots of people were going through the Siege Perilous, and it was actually kind of interesting because from what I could tell was they did not go through the Siege Perilous. They actually went back to the Mojo world, and it was going to be Longshot and Dazzler were going to raise their child, and there was some sort of a storyline that I can remember when I was a kid in the 90s that confirmed that they were going to have this child, and that was going to be Shatterstar.
Oh, okay. See, I remember Dazzler going through the Siege Perilous. So, did she? I mean, did that happen later on then, or she backed out of the Mojoverse stuff? What's going on there?
Can't answer your question. I think that both Dazzler and Longshot both went to the Mojoverse. Neither went to the Siege Perilous. The Siege Perilous seemed to be Colossus and Rogue and Storm and
Psylocke, notably.
Psylocke. Yeah, we had Psylocke there. So I apologize for being very slow with that, but I think that those were the characters that went through that.
Yeah, no, I just have this memory of Dazzler maybe going through it and then like washing up on a beach, and then she's sort of trying to figure out who she is, and then she ends up like getting wrapped up in the movie business, and then Strong Guy's there as well, and then she's got a stalker at that point. But maybe I'm mixing something up from another time.
I don't have that going on. I apologize.
No, no worries. And like I said, X-Men with its continuity can get kind of crazy sometimes. Especially, I mean, there's
I've tried so hard, my man. I've tried so hard to figure out what happened when everybody dealt with the Siege Perilous, and it's been 20 years and I haven't figured it out.
well, I think the Siege Perilous is just like really confusing to a lot of people.
It's so confusing. I know Colossus. He became like a painter in New York City. I got that.
Psylocke is the one I always remember because that's her notable transformation to Quinon's body. But let me ask you this very important question about Longshot. Getting back on topic, How come I never see this guy anywhere? Where I mean, like, where is Longshot? Where's he been? Where's he hiding? What rock is he under? I mean, do they just not utilize Longshot that much? Is that the case?
Yeah, yeah, that's unfortunate. It may be something interesting about the ownership. If you and I talk about it, we talk about who created it. It's Ann Nocenti and Art Adams. It's not Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. It's not some very, very clear ownership status. And I think that might have something to do with it. That's just one topic on the deal.
I guess it's sort of a who knows situation, but sort of circling back to that limited series. I just wanted to say I did really like this sort of the comedic figurative language I guess that they have in there. That is like in order to rule, you must be spineless, which is it's like it's great satire. It's like on the nose a little bit, but it's pretty funny.
Yeah, yeah, they are the spineless folks. And that is just something that sort of, jumped out to me once more modern media sort of jumped onto that. But I don't really know why Longshot doesn't get enough attention. I think Peter David has really complicated his origin story in a certain sense. Shatterstar is an X Force member, the X Force member with the double blades, and he does come from another dimension, right? And he is the canonological son of Longshot, but Longshot is also this clone of Shatterstar.
I did not know that, and it's always hilarious how complicated X-Men can get when you try to explain it to somebody who doesn't know certain things or certain aspects of characters. It's often not like beginner friendly, but there are some jumping on points.
What they have done is they have introduced a story where yes, Longshot exists, but he exists in sort of a time loop in order to spawn his son, which will eventually clone him. Something special there in the Mojo verse.
This reminds me, I wanted to bring this up. When I was reading that Long Shot limited series and they introduced Mojo and his minions and whatnot, maybe I read into this entirely wrong, but it seemed to me that like Mojo is kind of a queer coded character, at least in this storyline. I mean, is it just me picking that up?
That's interesting. That's interesting. I've never had anyone ask me about that, but I think that's entirely possible. The way that he interacts with Major Domo,
Yeah, him
the
specifically.
way exactly right
Yeah.
that's what you've got. It's probably written in by Nocenti and probably forgotten by future writers.
Yeah, it was just sort of this subtle vibe that I feel like was pulsating out of the book?
I can remember exactly what you're talking about, and I think I feel the same way.
All right, so just as we sort of start wrapping things up here, I just wanted to know if so the two big reading recommendations you had for Longshot were you said his Longshot 6 issue limited series was essential, and then you also said it's Uncanny X-Men Annual number 10. Is that correct?
Yeah, those are the ones that you really need to grab. There are Uncanny X-Men issues between the Inferno and Extinction Agenda sort of era that you should look into because Longshot is a part of that team, even though he's not a mutant, but they treat him as part of the squad. But yeah, it's absolutely the 6 issue miniseries, and it's the X Babies introduction at Uncanny X Men number 10.
Yes, and I have to add, I think these books are fabulous choices. I read them both for the first time for this podcast. I thought they were both really fun. Particularly, I'm fond of that X Babies issue just because I think the X Babies concept is so fun. And it sounds like he mentioned that there's a revisitation of that. So I'll be excited to check that out at some point. Thank you very much, Drew, for joining me. I think Longshot is a very underrated, cool character that was worth checking out. So I really appreciate you coming on and telling us all about him.
Oh, he's great. I love the guy.
And thank you all for listening. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you like this. And episode 3 will be coming soon. It is a Jean Grey episode, so stay tuned for that.